Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. Each episode will bring you in-depth discussion with experts, community leaders, and analysts who will share their insights, experiences, and predictions. From local elections to global diplomacy, we'll provide you with the tools and perspectives you'll need to navigate today's real-world landscape.
Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. I'm Lisa Chafee.
And I'm Josh Cease.
I'm Michael Nash.
Gentlemen, we have the president of the Institute for Liberty joining us. His name is Andrew Langer. He's been president since 2008. And Institute for Liberty works on a variety of issues promoting and protecting small businesses, linking trade and prosperity, fighting against the regulatory state, doing lots of things. Andrew, tell us more about yourself and the Institute for Liberty.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you said, Institute for Liberty has been around. I actually didn't start it. I took it over for a friend of mine. I like to say that I won it in a poker game, which obviously isn't true, but it's a good origin story. We focus on federal public policy mostly, and it's really about bringing common sense perspectives into things that are done. I spend a lot of my time working on the regulatory state, what the executive branch agencies are doing, making sure that they don't do things that are half-cocked or ill-conceived. It's one of those things where regardless of who's in power, if it's your friends in power and they're doing the right thing, you want to make sure they're going to do more of the right thing. When they're doing the wrong thing, you got to let them know that they're doing the wrong thing. And then when folks who disagree with you are in power, you got to be all the more vigilant. So we spend a lot of time looking at that, looking at the impact of the administrative state, the regulatory state on the economy, and how we might push back on that. But yeah, a lot of common sense stuff that's out there. I've been doing it forever and a day, and I very much enjoy it.
So one of the things that you're working on is, and I never even heard about this until someone brought this to my attention a few weeks ago about what you guys are doing, is that the Union Pacific Railroad is trying to acquire Norfolk Southern Railroad, roughly valued at about $85 billion. So why is this merger important to me, the middle-class person?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? We all grew up thinking that we had a transcontinental railroad in America. You know, you've got that image of Leland Stanton hammering in the Golden Spike at Promontory Point in Utah. And while, yes, we did have rail that goes across country, it was a patchwork of different companies doing different things, and it requires, especially right now, a lot of trade-offs, a lot of stops and starts, and it takes a long time to get goods moving across the country. What this merger does, and let me be really clear about this, we are not automatically pro-merger reflexively. There have been mergers that we have opposed. There have been mergers that we have supported like this one. But this one is important to the middle class because it will help goods move across the United States more efficiently and less expensively than having to stop and start and get transferred at depots and change tracks and change engines. It's one of those things where, commerce has to move quickly. Goods have to move quickly. And rail is, in the same way that ships are the easiest way and the least expensive way to move goods across oceans, trains are the easiest and least expensive way to move goods across the United States.
Andrew, excuse me. When it comes to the economic impact, are there any kind of numbers? Do you have any data backing you up to go, we can actually go down the list and show you how we can eliminate waste, how we can eliminate things that are inefficient. Can you qualify that or quantify that for the listener right now, that impact?
And I wish I had those numbers in front of me, and it's one of those things where I make it a point to never do math on the air.
Me either.
What we do know is that it will have an impact because, again, you're not having to negotiate a bunch of different contracts with a bunch of different railway systems. So there are the efficiencies that are at work there. Obviously, what we want to guard against is monopolistic systems. But what's great about this merger is, at the end of the day, if folks don't want to use a United Union Pacific Norfolk Southern, they can use other rail systems and negotiate with those entities individually. But I have a suspicion that this is going to lead to more mergers down the road and not fewer. I wish I had the specific numbers in front of me. Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay, that's fine, Andrew. No worries there.
Yeah.
So, we're here in Columbus, Ohio, and our news. I mean, we were inundated with the tragedy that happened. I call it an environmental tragedy that happened up in East Palestine, Ohio.
Right, of course.
And for folks listening that are leery of like, oh man, isn't our rail system infrastructure, because they talked about the problems with that track and parts that could have been replaced or should have been more well maintained. How if we see an increase of the flow of goods, what could you say to people in Ohio that are still kind of shell-shocked after that whole incident?
So, and I totally understand and agree with you here. At the end of the day, it wasn't mergers like this. It's not mergers like this, or even crew sizes, as some folks are talking about, reforms to crew size mandates that would prevent accidents like this. What does make accidents like this happen less often is investments in technology and the innovation that goes along with it. Now, I'm not saying that this merger leads to greater investments or greater research in technology, but generally, as a rule, the rail industry is and should be looking at that. You know, the East Palestine accident, tragic, 100% as it was. What it doesn't bespeak is that there was no regulatory problem that was at work here. What it was at the end of the day was, it was a failure of imagination. It's sort of anticipating the kinds of technological failures that can happen. So here's what happens: is you get Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern to come together. There is going to be continued research and investment in making sure that these tracks are clear, that the equipment is working as it should, and you don't need to engage in a whole host of mandates or to wed us all to 2026 technologies that might not serve us as well down the road. What we need is successful businesses that understand that every minute lost due to a track outage bespeaks the necessity of investing in safety features. That's what's going to happen next.
Well, here's an interesting take on that. We've been seeing a lot of, or I should say, if a lot is the correct word, numerous incidents of tractor trailers on our interstates being driven by people who can't speak English. Would this merger and an increase in railroad activity help lower the need for those truck drivers?
Right. So a lot of the work that I do is in something called comparative risk assessment, which is sort of looking at how public policy influences decision making and how, various regulations, they try to ameliorate risks, but they create risks of their own. And so, we have circumstances here. This is a perfect example where if you make it more difficult to move freight by rail and move freight by rail easily across country, then it follows that freight is going to be driven by an increased number of trucks. And when you have an increased number of trucks on the road, that means you need an increased number of drivers. And so there are all kinds of things that accrue to that in terms of the increased risk. Now, part of this is the issue of, and I don't know specifically about Ohio, but I know this has been a problem in Indiana. I know certainly Florida recently just did a survey of improperly issued commercial driver's licenses to people who couldn't verify who they were legally. If you are moving more freight by rail, then it obviates the need for you to go down the road and literally go down the road, pun intended, and use trucks.
Hey, Andrew, if you take a 30,000-foot view right now, what is your overall assessment of what we need to do, not just in rail, but in general, to make our transportation in this country more efficient, to lower costs, to get that to come down to the consumer level? What if you were sitting back and you could have all your druthers? What would an ideal situation look like, tying everything in together, Andrew?
Well, listen, it starts with permitting reform, which, when you make it more difficult to site large facilities in major metropolitan areas and transportation hubs, it drives up the cost and reduces the incentive to go and do these things. So if you start to make it easier for folks to build big transportation hubs, and for perhaps using, here's the thing about Ohio. Ohio was the center of the Rust Belt. There was an ancillary impact to the great environmental regulations, right? We did not want, right, when the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire, that was bad. And so we created a bunch of environmental laws and regulations that ensued from that. The problem then becomes when you take those lands that used to be manufacturing and are now what they call brownfields or Superfund sites, and you make it difficult to transition them into modern usage, right? All of these, or not all of them, but a huge number of them are located in these transportation hub areas, either right next to major rail lines or right next to roads or both. It makes it difficult to have the kind of consolidated and interconnected transportation systems that are out there. So it starts with permitting reform. Then we get into regulatory reform and finding ways to encourage innovation by these companies. Some of it comes down to expensing. Some of it comes down to making sure that these companies aren't being buried under paperwork, which allows them to then spend their time and energy investing in those companies and investing in the innovation. So we move down the road that way. But it starts with the permitting reform.
So I've been doing a little bit of research, and of course I had to ask Grok, what's the opposition to this? And one of them are the labor concerns. The Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, BLET, and the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees, they oppose the merger. They're saying that the job protection promises are, quote unquote, mostly hollow. They argued that UPNS will retain full control over who is protected, leaving loopholes for job cuts, relocations, craft changes. So what is your response to the union?
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, this is one of those concerns. Some of it has to do with, obviously, as they say, they're open about it, job protection, right? So these are the same folks who want to make sure that you mandate specific crew sizes on these trains, even though that's never really been an issue in terms of the accident rates that are out there. The other part of this is the fear of technology and technology supplanting jobs. And the reality is that you will always need to have folks who are out there doing visual inspections and also running the equipment that does the much deeper analyses of potential liabilities in these track areas. But it goes hand in hand. It's not an either or approach. But and I get it. It's unions, and unions are all about job protection. We understand that that's their motivation. But the reality is there are different kinds of jobs that will be made available as technology advances. Someone's going to have to run this. There's always going to have to be folks who are out there watching what's going on, analyzing the data that's out there, and eventually even going in and repairing these things. Listen, we are a long way off from having robots supplanting all of these jobs, and I don't think there will ever be an environment in which we want automation and robots doing all of the kind of inspection work that's out there. There will always be a human element, and these will be better jobs for the folks who are concerned today.
One last thing. So one of the other arguments that I'm seeing against this is that it's going to lead to higher costs for farmers, manufacturers, and consumers. The chemical industry are claiming that this merger would lead to higher costs and less reliable service. Although I'm not seeing them explain how's it going to lead to higher costs.
Exactly.
Well, right. Here's the basic thing is, the argument is like a lot of arguments about monopolization. And again, right, this is why I am not, reflexively pro-merger, on these things, because invariably when you get big corporate power structures, you can have folks being forced out of the marketplace. The reality with this merger at the end of the day is there are still other options that are out there. And if you feel like you're getting squeezed by a Norfolk Southern Union Pacific merged railway network, there will be other options that are out there. I go in the other direction on this, which is to say that when you streamline, right, instead of a farmer having to negotiate with a bunch of different carriers that are out there, or paying a service to negotiate with a bunch of different carriers that are out there to get their goods from, rural Ohio to either the East or West Coast, right? If you're dealing with one entity that's out there, they're going to be able to offer you a much better deal than if you have to take the time and energy to negotiate with 4, 5, 6 different entities to get your goods to the same location.
Andrew Langer, president for the Institute for Liberty. Thank you for joining us and explaining this and breaking it down. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, and if people
Thanks,
want,
guys. Listen, I appreciate it.
if people want to learn more about this, where can they go?
Listen, the best thing as always, is to follow me on X at Andrew_Langer. It's, all the work that I'm doing, whether it's on the merger, the regulatory work that I'm doing, the healthcare work that I'm doing, it's all out there. So at Andrew_Langer.
Wonderful. Andrew, thank you for joining us. This has been Straight
Thanks,
Shot
guys.
Politics.
Thank you.